Chinese scholars study official historical materials and claim that Tibet has not been part of China since ancient times. Liu Hanqing, a former City University of Hong Kong chair professor who now lives in the United States, spent nearly 10 years after his retirement studying China's official authoritative historical materials, and confirmed that Tibet has not been part of China since ancient times. Liu Hanqing said that he felt that the Chinese Communist Party's statement that Tibet has been China since ancient times was outrageous and embarrassing to the Chinese people. Generally speaking, Chinese people do not have the guts to lie like this. He believed that the Chinese Communist Party's aggression against Tibet was worse than Japan's China's aggression is even worse. Liu Hanqing, retired professor of management science at City University of Hong Kong, recently published a new book, Tibet Has Not Been Part of China Since Ancient Times, at a Tibetan seminar in Taipei and published by Snolan Publishing House. The book is more than 800 pages thick. Liu Hanqing said that he positioned the book as follows, using Chinese classical books recognized by the CCP itself, to prove that Tibet was never Chinese territory before 1950. It was acquired by the CCP in 1950 by force. Territory. Liu Hanqing, Tibet did not belong to China during the Yuan and Qing dynasties. It was a territory acquired by force in 1950. This book focuses on how the official classics of the Ming and Qing dynasties describe Tibet. He also has historical materials from the Yuan dynasty and the Republic of China to be continued. Liu Hanqing said that during the Ming dynasty, no government, official documents, scholars, or privately published books said that Tibet belonged to China. The tribute paid and official titles also proved that Tibet was not part of China at that time. Liu Hanqing said, "It is true that the Ming dynasty granted titles to people from Tibet as officials. But in fact, the Ming dynasty also granted titles to Japan, Burma, and Vietnam. There are even records that the Ming dynasty also granted titles to the King of France as king. This is of course ridiculous. These records can only reflect that, at that time, the Chinese emperors liked to give people official titles everywhere, but this did not represent sovereignty at all. As for tribute, it was even more ridiculous. In fact, at that time, the Ming dynasty wanted to send money to these Tibetan lamas so that they did not want it. When the West comes to harass China, they use documents from the highest-ranking government in the Ming dynasty to prove this. As for the Qing dynasty, he said that many historical materials in the early Qing dynasty did not record that Tibet belonged to China. Later, some documents clearly stated that Tibet belonged to China. But was what the Qing government said correct? It is debatable, just like the Japanese government claims that Diaoyutai belongs to Japan, but China does not recognize it. Liu Hanqing compared the following criteria, including whether the Qing government had Tibetan population records and household registration records, tax certificate, imperial examination system. Are there any dispatch officials? Did it help Tibet resist foreign enemies? Liu Hanqing said, the conclusion is that the Qing Empire did not have the ability to conduct a census in Tibet, had no Tibetan household registration records, did not have the ability to collect taxes in Tibet, and did not help Tibet resist foreign enemies, etc. So the proof is very clear that Tibet at that time was not owned by the Qing dynasty. Part of it. Official document of the Qing minister stationed in Tibet to prepare for the return of Tibetan political power. And it will be an excellent colony for me in the future. Page 440 of the book, Tibet has not been a part of China since ancient times, quotes Zhang Yintang. The Qing dynasty's minister stationed in Tibet, recording that Zhang Yintang wrote in the sent to an external telegram to Chen for preliminary proposal on the governance of Tibet in the 33rd year of Guangzhou 1907 ad. We should urgently prepare to take back the political power in Tibet, train troops and establish schools. If we want to take back the political power, we must take advantage of the fact that the Dalai Lama has not returned and recruit hundreds of army graduates. Titles and generous annual stipends are given, just like the system of various vassal kings in India. 1. If the Governor of India, Governor-General of India, uses royal gifts, the name of the host country will be determined by himself. Tibet is 7,000 miles across, and its mineral resources are as good as 5 continents. In the future, it will surely this is a perfect colony for me. If the manager recruits people, the results will be doubled in 10 years, and the annual business income will be tens of millions. Therefore, Liu Hanqing said that from the official document of Zhang Yintang, the Qing dynasty minister in Tibet, urgent preparations are made to take back the power in Tibet, and it will be an excellent colony for me in the future. Which shows that Tibet was not part of China in the Qing dynasty. Liu Hanqing also mentioned that Britain sent troops to invade Tibet twice. Official documents of the Qing dynasty recorded that the Qing dynasty fully supported the British invasion of Tibet, and Tibet persisted in resisting British aggression. The report written by the British admitted that they carried out massacres of Tibetans when they marched into Tibet. After the massacre, the Qing minister in Tibet was notified. At that time, the Qing dynasty did not pay a penny or send a single soldier to help Tibet resist the British. However, the Qing minister in Tibet received the British military report and thanked the British army for teaching them these things. Tibet, and used the words, "There is no limit to the benefit to Tibet," to praise the British Army's immeasurable merits. Liu Hanqing said, "Would you believe that the Qing minister in Tibet, after the British massacred the Tibetans, would thank the British and say that they had benefited Tibet forever?" This is not just the official document of the Qing dynasty, and it was a classical version reprinted by the People's Republic of China. Obviously, the Qing Empire did not regard Tibet as its own people or territory. Otherwise, how could it praise the British Army for entering Tibet so much? Liu Hanqing said that the research only used Chinese official authoritative historical materials and did not consider Tibetan and Western historical materials. Liu Hanqing insisted on using the Chinese's own authoritative historical materials to check whether Tibet belonged to China before, and emphasized that the historical materials he used completely ignored the opinions of Tibetans and Westerners, and only used historical materials written by Chinese people, including those written by the Yuan dynasty before 1949, Ming dynasty, Qing dynasty, and Republic of China author or official writing. Furthermore, these books had to be later republished by the People's Republic of China after 1949. Third, it must be publicly accessible in the library. He also referred to the geographical documents of the Yuan, Ming, and Qing dynasties to see whether Tibet had been included in the territory and verified whether there were tax collection, population surveys, household registration records, troop deployments, conscription, imperial examinations, and other information. The CCP has emphasized for many years that if the Tibetan government in exile wants to negotiate with the CCP, Tibetan representatives must first recognize that Tibet has been an integral part of China's territory since ancient times. Liu Hanqing, China declares that Tibet belongs to China since ancient times, to cover up military occupation and destruction of the country. Liu Hanqing analyzed that the government of the People's Republic of China has always claimed that Tibet has been part of China since ancient times, because the 1945 United Nations Charter clearly stipulates that member states must promise not to invade other people's territories with force. China is a member of the United Nations and must abide by it. Therefore, the CCP's so-called peaceful liberation of Tibet with the army in 1950 was actually an occupation. However, it cannot admit that it sent troops to destroy Tibet, so it must pretend that Tibet has been its own since ancient times, and that it only inherited the reunified territory from its ancestors. Liu Hanqing, whose ancestral home is Huaxian County, Guangdong, has been fond of Chinese history and literature since he was a child. At that time, he studied science and engineering because he was considering a career path. He said that the reason why he spent nearly 10 years studying Tibetan history after retirement was because he once argued with the British that Tibet has been a part of China since ancient times. The British were shocked to realize that they had been deceived since childhood. Liu Hanqing said that in the 1980s, he returned to his motherland to settle down and give free lectures. At that time, it had just opened up and needed a lot of foreign talents. After returning to China, he discovered that the outside world said how good the CCP's construction was, which was not the case at all. In the CCP's education, lying is not allowed a bad thing, especially if you lie for the party and the country, is actually a good thing. Liu Hanqing believes that China claims that Tibet has been part of China since ancient times. This statement is outrageous and embarrassing to the Chinese people. Most people do not have the guts to lie like this. Liu Hanqing also mentioned that in the Qing Dynasty version of Shengwu Ji, it talks about how many common people there are in Tibet. But the People's Republic of China reprinted the version and directly changed common people to serfs. Hey, it's really amazing, that is. How could there be such a big difference? Who is falsifying and deceiving people? I find it incredible. There are many such examples in the book. Liu Hanqing published a book to expose the truth and donated royalties to Tibetan exile education. Liu Hanqing said that he published this book only to expose the truth. He did not receive any royalties. Snowland Publishing House worked on the compilation and printing for free. After deducting the printing fee, the proceeds were donated to Tibetan exile education in Dharamsala, India. Liu Hanqing mentioned that his grandfather was a carpenter and built several houses to collect rent. During the anti-Japanese war, all the houses were destroyed by the Japanese. After that, under the leadership of the Chinese Communist Party, he became a working proletariat. It can be said that he has never suffered anything from the Chinese Communist Party. Deficit. His mother went to Nanyang in Singapore to work as a female worker. She believed deeply in nationalism and had very poor memories of Japan's invasion of China and the 8-year War of Resistance. Liu Hanqing revealed that there is another reason for publishing this book. I hope to use this book to tell the Chinese that we think it is wrong for the Japanese to do this to the Chinese. But the Chinese are unreasonable and cruel to the Tibetans. Compared to the Japanese, China is even worse. Liu Hanqing said that Japan and China have the same culture, and it makes sense to call them the Greater East Asia Co-Prosperity Sphere, but China has absolutely nothing in common with Tibet. He called on people not to do to others what they do not want others to do to them. If Japan does something wrong, China should not imitate it.